I think when Chetna arrived at base camp, we saw the extent of her injuries. We knew that she'd probably lose her fingers, and her cheeks were very, very waxy and frostbitten. I think it was quite surreal for her. I think it took a significant amount of time for her to realise what had happened.
8 hours in the snow, me and my Sherpa.
Yeah.
And he took care of me a lot.
You okay? You okay?
When I was sinking, he told me that remember your daughter.
Yeah.
And he just wake me up. Ma'am,
Saved your life.
Yeah, he saved my
Saved your
life.
life.
Everybody says I climbed Everest. Wrong. It is Sherpas who climb. Okay. It is Sherpas who take us to the Everest.
Those were two amateur climbers who, with the help of their 2 Sherpa guides and a Sherpa rescue team, were saved from the quote-unquote death zone of Mount Everest. Although the term Sherpa has become synonymous with Everest mountain guides, it actually describes an entire ethnic group, only some of whom are mountaineers.
It's really important to reinforce this fact. Sherpa does not mean to carry something. You know, we got all kinds of packs, stuff called the Sherpa, baby carriers called the Sherpa. It's an ethnic group, it's not a job.
The word Sherpa comes from the 2 Sherpa language words Shiar, meaning east, and Pa, meaning people, denoting their native region as being eastern Nepal, aka the Himalayas. By nature of continuously inhabiting the Himalayas for more than 30,000 years, Sherpas are astonishingly well adapted to very high altitudes. Sherpa people currently hold or have held most Mount Everest summit records, including most summits held by Kamirita Sherpa with 24 summits, most ascents by a woman held by Lakpa Sherpa with 9 summits, fastest ascent held by Lakpa Gelu Sherpa with 10 hours, 56 minutes, and 46 seconds, and longest stay on the summit held by Babu Chiri Sherpa with 21 hours. A Sherpa man, Tenzing Norgay Sherpa, was also the first man to summit Everest, an honor jointly held by Sir Edmund Hillary. These joint accomplishments are made all the more impressive by the fact that, on many summiting occasions, Sherpa guides are carrying not only their own gear, but also that of those they're guiding, leading to comically large packs which weigh almost as much as the guide themselves. So how exactly do they do it? Well, if I, a lowlander born and raised, were to climb Mount Everest, I would go through a process called acclimatization. At high altitudes, there's lower atmospheric pressure, so molecules of air are less pressed together. Because air molecules are farther apart at high altitudes, each breath contains less air and therefore less oxygen. Altitude acclimatization is a collection of short-term changes that occur at altitude to compensate for this low oxygen level. They focus on increasing oxygen delivery, so that even though you're breathing in less oxygen, the same amount of oxygen is delivered to the tissues. For example, high altitude stimulates the spleen to produce more red blood cells. This means that the blood contains more hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen. Another mechanism of altitude acclimatization is to increase the amount of D2,3-biphosphoglycerate, or BPG, in the blood. BPG affects hemoglobin's oxygen affinity rather than the overall amount of hemoglobin, like in red blood cell overproduction. Hemoglobin is a tetramer with 4 identical subunits, and due to the very tight interface between subunits, a change in the conformation of one subunit results in a conformational change in all subunits. For this reason, hemoglobin only has 2 conformational states, the T, or deoxy or non-oxygen bound state, and the R, or oxy, or oxygen-bound state. When BPG binds to hemoglobin, it stabilizes the T, or deoxy state, which makes hemoglobin less likely to bind to oxygen because it would then have to change to the now less stable oxy, or R state. Because BPG makes hemoglobin less likely to bind to oxygen, it is said to lower hemoglobin's oxygen affinity. This means that at high altitudes, even though less oxygen is breathed in, with BPG, more oxygen is released by hemoglobin, and along with the overall greater amounts of hemoglobin due to increased red blood cell production, this keeps tissue levels of oxygen about the same. Despite the importance of these complex short-term changes in helping most people survive the thin air at very high altitudes, Sherpa people don't seem to need to acclimatize at all. As a matter of fact, several studies have shown that Sherpa people actually have a lower concentration of hemoglobin at altitude than typical lowlanders. Rather than having a number of short-term mechanisms to increase oxygen delivery, as in lowlander acclimatization, Sherpa people have simply evolved to use less oxygen, or to use oxygen more efficiently. For example, more so than lowlanders, Sherpas favor anaerobic metabolism for ATP production rather than aerobic metabolism, thus preserving oxygen. And although anaerobic metabolism is less efficient at producing ATP, Sherpas also produce higher levels of phosphocreatine at altitude than lowlanders, which is a molecule that can also be metabolized in the short term to produce ATP. These Sherpa-specific efficiencies are believed to be genetic, so don't feel too bad if you're struggling to put one foot in front of the other on the way up to Everest and a Sherpa races past you to the summit. Despite their genetic predisposition to impressive feats of mountaineering, guiding is not the first choice job among many Sherpa people, for good reason. Sherpa guides on Everest and the surrounding mountains have a higher mortality rate than American soldiers in the Iraq War. Appa Sherpa, one-time world record holder for most Everest summits with 21, speaks more on how many Sherpa feel forced into guiding.
So my goal was not for climbing, so get the education and become a doctor. But unfortunately, when I was age of 12 and my father passed away, then I have no choice. I need to support for my family. Then I become a porter, so it's carrying more than my body weight. So then I did a trekking guide, and then I did at the base camp. I did a dishwasher in base camp. Then after, the climbing is very risky, so I didn't want to climb. But we get a little more money for climbing. Then I start to climb the Everest. Then it's very risky. So my lot of Sherpa friends, they die over there. So that's why my goal is, I don't want to, those young generation, I don't want to climb those young generation. They get a good education.
As Appa Sherpa said, guiding or portering is good money if you didn't have the resources to go to school, but only if you survive. And if you don't, the minimum life insurance for Sherpa guides is only $4,600, which even in Nepal is in many cases not enough to cover the funeral. Marveling at their inherent athletic ability and learning about the biology behind it is only one way of telling the story of the Sherpa, and their stories are important to tell. National Geographic explorer Aaron Huey says it best.
It's usually the Westerner we see in the victory pose. And to me, it's a reminder, in this world full of stories about Western climbers and victories and dramas, that it's not all about us.
As always, thanks for listening.